ratio for a talkback I've never seen. Okay, so I thought it would be, this is Meg Farrell, who is a great friend of the Meg, I thought we'd begin with you. Who's this Wilby Johnstone when he's at home?
Well, this was so special to me because this show actually has always had a history in my family, especially the Napoleon scene, from which there was a speech that was sort of taken from different parts of the scene that became something that anyone said, I must be off. Immediately we launched into, well, I must be off. Beyond the Alps lies Peter's milk chocolate. I'll bring it home. And by the way, if my laundry comes, send it to Russia, carry general delivery. And you might sew a button on hither and yon. Hither's not so bad, but yon. So that whole thing became a speech I knew. So I knew the Napoleon scene. So when I looked into it and found it was already something familiar, lots of stories about the show. Will B. himself, originally from Illinois, from Evanston, Illinois. He was probably more famous as a political cartoonist. He worked for the New York Evening World from 1909 until his death in 1944. And his most famous image was one you may be familiar with. A taxpayer has been reduced to wearing nothing but a barrel that says taxpayer on it. Yeah. He's, as far as who he was at home, he was somewhat fond of the drink and certainly fond of a joke, and very into his art, a painter as well, which not a lot of people knew. He made some shows with his brothers, starting in 1911, but didn't have success until a show called Take It From Me in 1919. Also in that year he tried Love for Sale, which was the original show out of which grew I'll Say She Is. Same kind of concept. It was for a beauty of the time named Kitty Gordon, and it was very much around her beauty, and that's why the character was originally named Beauty. That show didn't go over, had some problems in the production. They tried to revive it again as Give Me a Thrill, which was a unit show, which no one knows about those whole thing, and the Shuberts and their unit shows, like an afterpiece of a vaudeville night. Then the Marxes, as Marx Brothers fans know, in 1923 were rather at loose ends. They'd made the Keith Albee agency angry, and they had been blacklisted and were struggling for work. So the Shuberts had put them in an unsuccessful one of their unit shows, and in April of 1923 they ended up in the office of Ned Wayburn, who was one of their early mentors and a mutual friend with Joseph Gates, who was the manager for my great-grandfather. And that was the inception of I'll Say She Is. And thus, not all the stories you heard about Chico in front of the palace.
Oh darn. Print the legend. Yeah, I thought there was something about the chorus girl that he was romancing.
Well, I looked into the chorus girl in the diaries, because I have my great-grandfather's diaries, and I looked into that, and Harpo was enamored of one of the chorus girls, but it didn't have anything to do with Barry, who was the other producer. That's the story goes, that somehow he wanted to show for his chorus girl. No, Gates somehow found Barry, and the chorus girl was incidental. But at that point, Harpo was single, so why not chase chorus girls?
And Will B. also co-wrote some of their movies, right? Was it Monkey Business?
Yeah, he was brought out to Hollywood along with S.J. Perlman to write the script for Monkey Business, and he also worked on Horse Feathers.
So Noah, how did you come to this material? How did you hear about it? How did you get the idea to do it?
Well, I probably, like many people here, it's just always been fascinating to me. We have a pretty good record of coconuts and animal crackers on film, and as you said at the top of the show too, they've been revived. In fact, right now, Coconuts is being done in Oregon at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Is the Oregon Shakespeare Festival here tonight? And Animal Crackers is being done in Denver at the Denver Center, which means that this week, if you were willing to travel, you could have seen all three. That has never happened before in history. So it's this missing piece of the Marx Brothers canon, and it's their Broadway period that has always been the most interesting to me, because I love Broadway in New York and the Jazz Age, and the idea that the Marx Brothers went mainstream after getting the seal of approval from Alexander Woollcott and the Algonquin crowd. It's just a beautiful stew of all this wonderful stuff. The Marx Brothers, the Jazz Age, the Algonquin crowd, and Broadway. And Coconuts and Animal Crackers as films, although they're often attacked for being too stagey. They just turned on the camera and did their comedy in front of it, Who could possibly find that entertaining? So I love those two films.
And where did they film those two
And they
films?
filmed them in New York, and as you probably know, when they were filming Coconuts, they were appearing in Animal Crackers on Broadway. So when you watch the film Coconuts, you're looking at the Marx Brothers before the stock market crashed and during their period as Broadway stars. And this is just the time in their career that I've always loved, and at the top of my time travel wish list has always been May 19th, 1924, which almost 90 years ago this week, that I'll Say She is opened up.
Yeah.
How did you decide to, were you interested in just kind of poking around and exploring it, or do you have this idea that you wanted to make a vehicle and get it on its feet?
I probably did, but I was coy about it. There's a typescript that exists. Wilby Johnstone submitted it to the Library of Congress. It's about 35 pages. It's an outline with dialogue. And it's around, it's found its way onto the internet, of course. This we've determined was written sometime in 1923 before they went into rehearsals for the Philadelphia tryouts. So it's not the script of the show, but it does have a pretty generous amount of dialogue in it. And no song lyrics, but it says what the titles of the songs are and where they go, and sometimes it gives some narrative context. So I got a hold of this, and that's the primary source. And then I pulled in material from all these other sources, including newspaper columns. Broadway columnists would go see these shows over and over again because Groucho in particular would rewrite his part every night. So his best ad-libs found their way into Broadway columns. And I have read the New York Sun, the New York Morning World, the Philadelphia Inquirer. Everywhere I'll Say She Is went, I tried to find all the newspapers during the run. And a surprising amount of dialogue and material and description of what happened on stage was retrievable from newspapers. And then, as Meg mentioned, the Johnstones, they wrote 5 or 6 of these reviews, and 3 or 4 of them were about bored heiresses looking for thrills. So it was possible.
Up in the Clouds.
Yeah, Up in the Clouds. They loved 4-word titles also. Up in the Clouds, Take It From Me, Give Me a Thrill.
Well, but also about I'll Say She Is that Johnston, it was not Johnstone's pick for the name of the show. He wanted to call it Give Me a Thrill.
Yeah, or You Must Come Over, I think, at one point.
Now, I never heard that one. But Give Me a Thrill is what he wanted. Not gimme, but Give Me a Thrill, which was the 4 words.
Yeah.
But, which Gates had a thing about, apparently, about 4-word titles. And, there's actually an entry in the diary where he said that the producers have told him that the name is I'll Say She Is, and he expresses that he's not happy about it.
Yeah, Joseph M. Gates was the kind of, like a second-tier producer who would run shows on Broadway. They would run for a week, and they would be, trashed by the critics. But then they'd tour the country for years, direct from Broadway. and the other guy...
Like Take It From Me.
Yeah, Take It From Me. Well, Take It From Me was fairly well reviewed.
It ran about 3 months.
A 3-month run, which was the equivalent of a 6-month run today on Broadway. And James P. Bury was a Pennsylvania... Is it Joseph M. Gates? The M stood for minimum. And James P. Bury, the P stood for Pennsylvania coal magnate or something like that. Those were the 2 producers.
Yeah, well then the Shuberts were involved. There's also this whole thing of how this came about, and is the war between the Schuberts and the Keith Albee Agency. Because the Keith Albee Agency had a hold on, producing shows all around the country, and the Schuberts were trying to break that with the Shubert Advanced Vaudeville, which Give Me a Thrill was part of, which the Marx brothers were part of with the show. What was the name?
It was the 20th Century.
The 20th Century, yeah. So I think that's how the Schuberts became involved, and they were involved in producing it, and involved in when it was on the road.
The Schuberts wound up being the big losers, like in the success story of I'll Say She Is, because it was in a way the fusion of two Shubert unit shows, the Marx Brothers 20th Century Review and Joseph Gates' Give Me a Thrill.
Yeah.
These were both Shubert unit shows, and if you read Trav's book, you'll hear about the disaster that Shubert Advanced Vaudeville met. The whole thing lasted like less than a year, I think. Mm-hmm. And what wound up happening is the Schuberts became the landlords for I'll Say She Is on Broadway. They played at the Casino, which was a Shubert theater. Yeah. And in the summer of '24, the Casino was the only Shubert theater not on cut rates, and the only Shubert theater with a non-Shubert tenant.
So, and portions of this show date from their vaudeville times, is that correct?
Yeah, the Marx Brothers material, some of it was the rhyming sketch at the beginning, which is the one part that exists on film. Right. You can find the Marx Brothers doing it in 1931.
It's on YouTube. You can look
it's a Paramount, The House That Shadows Built.
Yeah, that's right. A big Marx Brothers fan named Bob Gassell, he saw this reading on Friday, and he immediately went on Facebook. He said, well, I tried to film the reading. They made me stop, but here's what I managed to get. They posted that clip.
He posted that clip? I love that.
The rhyming sketch and parts of the courtroom scene was a Will B. Johnstone composition, but I think the poker game had existed. We didn't do that in its entirety tonight because it's very physical. You'll see it in August.
Yeah, among the things you'll see in the show are lots of bits of physical business, lots of obviously Harpo stuff. Didn't make it to the reading, but will be in the full show.
Yeah, and there's stuff before from Love for Sale and from Give Me a Thrill and from Up in the Clouds too. I mean, the Greed of Gold.
Yes.
I mean, Ledro Stifler, who is originally hopefully you're going to have somebody all in gold.
Oh,
yeah, got it. And it was his bit, and he'd done that in Up in the Clouds. The same guy had done a similar number in Up in the Clouds.
So he always went around dressed in gold paint?
Apparently.
He looked like C-3PO or like an Oscar. And then there's pictures of him, posed
he looks kind of like an Oscar, and the songs from previous shows. So it's not unusual that you're following a grand Broadway tradition in the way that you interpolated songs from other shows and new lyrics and stuff. That's it. It's right in the tradition. I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
and everything still sounds of the period. And
I hope so. I hope it's hard to tell what the original material is and what the additions are. But about half the songs in the version that you saw tonight are songs from I'll Say She Is, and the other half are songs from other shows written by the Johnstones in the same period. Often with some combination of their original lyrics and lyrics that I've added to fit I'll Say She Is. And the hardest thing about that is not anticipating the Rodgers and Hammerstein era too much, and like not writing lyrics that are too motivated by the plot, but somehow keeping it's really counterintuitive. Like if you're immersed in the modern musical, it has very little to do with the musical of the 20s, when I shouldn't say all, but generally the songs were so good and the shows were so forgettable. In the 20s, you can think of a few like Showboat that rose above, but it was an era of great songwriting and disposable shows, and they had to have, say, the Marx Brothers to
Stars, the Stars.
Remember that you saw it here almost more as a book show, but when you see it in August, it'll be closer to review, which is what it was, and it was what people would say is a book review. So reviews different from the vaudeville shows in that there's some something that ties the whole evening together, a theme or some sort of thin plot, like, you know, a rich woman looking for a thrill. And that was really handy for a book review because you could insert thrills or take them out at will, and the show could have changed over time. But also, you know, in these reviews, you needed to have spectacle, you needed to have music, and you needed to have comedy. And depending on what review it was, those elements, one would be stronger than the other. Obviously what sold this, the laugh-a-minute review, was the Marx Brothers, and that became the selling point very quickly. And so the thing that's most interesting to me as a scholar is understanding where is this success at this point. It finally gelled that someone could write a show that facilitates the Marx Brothers comic antics, their bits, almost like any other librettist would facilitate a song. Creating situations, you needed to create situations in which their chaos could happen, because their chaos needed to be contained in some way or the show just would have no structure at all.
Yeah, I need something to play against.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Hey, you there, sir, were first.
Yes, I have two questions. First, did Margaret Dumont play the Dowager in this show? And my second question is, in the 1960s, ABC did an animated special called The Mad Comedians. And they recreated the Napoleon sketch for that. And I was wondering if you came across that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Margaret Dumont question, the answer is no. Margaret Dumont did not enter the Marx Brothers story until the Broadway version of The Coconuts, just after Alsatians. I took the liberty of adding a Dowager character. In the original Alsatians, there is a character named Ruby, and she has that role in the story. She's the confidant and companion to the Lotta Miles character, Beauty. But she was the social secretary. And I decided, instead of the social secretary, I'd make her aunt and guardian, in order to get that dowager. It seems at this point to be a crucial ingredient in the recipe. And, however, there was the dowager character in Marx Brothers comedy predates the Coconuts. On the Mezzanine, which was a Broadway tab that they did before Alsatians, there was a character named Mrs. Gould, who was that character. It wasn't played by Dumont. And in fact, some of the material in the Groucho Ruby scenes tonight, some of that I've taken from surviving fragments of On the Mezzanine. Ever since I met you, there's been something I'm ashamed of, and I think it's you. That's from On the Mezzanine. And, if not for that, I don't think I would have taken the liberty, but it existed in their mythos already, so there you have it. And you had a second question.
The Mad Comedians.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. It's on YouTube. Groucho himself did his own voice in a kind of 5-minute animated version of the Napoleon scene. Personally, I find it somewhat hard to watch, frankly.
Yeah.
It's Groucho at that point, although he was still wonderful and funny, he was a little too slow to do that version of his character.
Yeah.
And there's some strange underscoring.
When is it from?
It's
What?
late 60s.
Yeah.
The Mad Comedians.
It's The Mad Comedians. You can find it on YouTube, and it's fascinating. But for me, it's not a representation of how the Napoleon scene, I think, really felt.
How did you find it?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What was that?
How did you find the Napoleon scene?
The Napoleon scene is one of the more generously sourced pieces. I mean, it's in the typescript, and then in a much different version in the Groucho file it was published. That's a version that was known as Schweinerei. The Marx Brothers actually toured vaudeville houses in the 30s during their film career, in the early 30s, and did the Napoleon scene. In fact, occasionally with Lotta Miles, reunited. There's about 3 Napoleon scenes out there, and I tried to favor the Johnstone typescript whenever possible, but pulled in material from elsewhere.
Gentleman over there.
Yeah, 10 years before this, the Marx Brothers were singing, right, with Minnie. They were the 4 Nightingales. Do you know any conversations, even within the family, when they said, when are we going to do comedy? How did the move to comedy take place with them? They were successful singers.
Well, but they were the exuberant children that you can imagine that they were. There's a story that their mother kind of wanted to discourage comedy because the rules in vaudeville were very strict, you know, and they wanted to cut up. But there's a famous story that they were in Nacogdoches, Texas. It may have been another town, but they always claimed it was there because it has a funny name. And, you know, they were a singing act, and apparently a mule got loose on the street. And so, like, the whole audience, it would be like if all you guys ran out there to go look at, you know, some crazy, a car or something. And then came back, and we were really pissed at you, and started, like, making wisecracks. And that's the legendary story. It probably didn't happen on one day, but it probably happened gradually. And actually, as early as a couple of years before that, that was 1909, as early as 1907, 1908, there are press clippings that indicate that Groucho was playing a character named Hans Pumpernickel. And he was doing a little like, through most of their, or a good chunk of their vaudeville career, he did a German character in the way that Chico does an Italian character. And he started breaking that in early, when they were still singing it.
And if the Nacogdoches story is true, there is one line that has survived through the ages. Would you like to hear the line? Supposedly, when the crowd came back in from seeing the mule out in the street and encountered these angry Marx brothers suddenly magically transformed into comedians, Groucho favored them with, "Nacogdoches is full of roaches." The only room where that will ever be indulged. Thank you.
Sort of the Groucho file question. I was going to ask about that. They just said that was a later version, the one in the Groucho file?
Yeah, or at least that's my understanding, that version, in that book Groucho says, the Napoleon scene was considered lost, but we found it in my desk drawer. Of course, all that time it was sitting in the Library of Congress, and Meg has the diary entry where Johnstone says, you know, that he was persuaded to submit it to the Library of Congress. Which for me is like, to read that in his own words is amazing. If he hadn't done that, you know, we never would have had the typescript to do this tonight.
Yeah, well, he was fighting with his brother that day at rehearsal. They were working on the courtroom scene, and it wasn't going well. The Marxists had actually tried to do it their way and improvise the whole thing, and it wasn't working, and it was a horrible day. And they were trying to rewrite it, and he and his brother Tom were having a big fight. And Tom was accusing him of having not written the show, and so he went to the Marx Brothers and he said to them directly, you know, did I write this show? And afterwards, the stage manager was the one who said to him, you know, you better get this copyrighted, this script, because people are going to ask. And indeed, as some people might know, Alexander Wolcott in his column actually claimed that Harpo wrote the Napoleon scene, and Johnstone sent him a letter of complaint, which and Wolcott did print a rather weak retraction, a bit of Johnstone's letter in it. So there was some suggestion. There's been suggestions over the time that Johnstone didn't write it. The truth is, at the time, these kinds of shows, this is the way they weren't exactly written. They were constructed out of various bits and pieces. So this was the norm at the time. We're used to thinking, it wasn't till much later. You don't even get to start with Showboat and Oscar Hammerstein II there, and then even more so with Oklahoma and the integrated musical, where you actually think a script is going to be associated with a particular writer, and that is the Bible. Because in the 20s, even shows that were considered book shows were flexible in that way, and they were an outline. And we don't have scripts for a lot of those shows, because there was just an outline and there was a lot of ad-libbing, and there still was, even in book shows, people coming in and doing their signature bits or their signature songs.
And the reconstruction of Shuffle Along in the 70s was like that. You know, in order to like track down all the songs existed because the songwriters were, you know, U.B. Blake. But in order to find and Noble Sissel, yeah. But in order to find the text material for Shuffle Along, there's stories about like going to the homes of the children of cast members and just searching through boxes, and they were not so precious about their material as they became in the post-World War II theater.
Okay, well, I'm being told we're just about out of time. Maybe just one more question, you, sir.
No, we're so impressed with your portrayal of Groucho. How you first got into the portrayal and what techniques you have used over the years.
And how did you do those corkscrew kicks so well?
Awesome.
Oh boy, thank you so much, first of all. Playing Groucho, it's amazing if you just concentrate on something for 30 or 40 years. I don't know. I mean, I think it's a deep. It began in childhood for me, as I'm sure love of the Marx Brothers did for so many people here tonight. And I don't know. I identified with him. And quickly decided that I would just be him as much as possible. In school, I would have like a sort of matronly teacher, and I'd be like, Mrs. Rediscovering. Wanted so much to be that. It's being the cheeky kid. Groucho was, as you know, he was the enemy of everything that you didn't like, and whatever you didn't like would be your substitute for Margaret Dumont and the stuffy world that Groucho bounces against in those movies. So he was, a safety valve for me. Until I became interested in girls and realized they don't like him so much. So I had to get into Woody Allen. And in performance, I don't know. I've been doing Groucho on stage since I was, I think 14 was the first time I really did it in front of an audience. I did it at home. There are some people here tonight who could tell you I rehearsed at home for a number of years before that. And now I am the age that Groucho was when, during their Broadway period. And so it seems like a great time to do this and, to just do it as much as possible right now. It's easier to put it on than it used to be, probably because it's baked into me so heavily over the years. The corkscrew kicks.
So show us.
I'll give you a couple of corkscrew kicks, but then I have to give credit where credit is due. The corkscrew kick is just. However, I gotta tell you, I have been doing Groucho since I was 14, which is 23 years. But the corkscrew kicks eluded me for a very long time. I used to watch in Animal Crackers in slow motion, try to figure out what he did, how he did that. And I still think, although you're all very generous, I still think I'm not quite. When Groucho does it, it's like his legs are just blowing in the wind. And, I'm getting there, but I used to fake it like by just doing this, and like I try to do it. And my wife, Amanda, was here. Not only improved my corkscrew kick technique by breaking it down with me and teaching me how to do it and being very patient with me. I'm not a choreographer's dream. And not only did she perfect my corkscrew kicks, she also curled my hair and got my hair much closer to Groucho's than it's ever been before. If there are any single men here who love the Marx Brothers, I hope you find a beautiful woman who will teach you how to dance like Groucho.
Thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you in August.